Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining this Q&A session for Race Oncology today. My name is Jane Lowe, and I will be your host for this session. I'm hugely proud to support Race on Investor Relations and to welcome you all along after what has honestly been an incredible past 12 months. With me tonight are Phil Lynch, who's Race's CEO and Managing Director, Dr. Daniel Tillett, Race's CSO, hi Daniel, and Executive Director, and also Dr. David Fuller, who is Race's Chief Medical Officer. Hi David. There is no presentation tonight. It's an open Q&A session. So you're invited to type your questions into the Zoom panel at the bottom of your screen as we go through, and we'll get through as many as we can in the time that we have. We've earmarked about 45 minutes for tonight's session, given no doubt you've all got holiday plans to kick on with. So thank you in advance for submitting those. And I fully expect at least one about Daniel's shirt. Now, we have received some questions in advance of this session, so let's get started. And Phil and Daniel, I'll ask you guys to direct traffic. Okay, so kicking off, regarding Pillar 3, is there a potential for a spin-off post-Xantrine transaction?
I'll take that, Jane. The answer is yes. It really opens up a lot of opportunities for the company beyond Xantrine. And obviously that's the name of the pillar, is beyond Xantrine. We have built up a lot of skill in this space, a lot of knowledge, and the M6A opportunity is a massive opportunity in oncology and beyond oncology. So whilst we have a fantastic drug in the oncology space, it's not necessarily ideal for all applications. For example, neurological, obesity, there's a whole bunch of different areas, gastrointestinal, that where Xantrine probably not appropriate drug to use. And having drugs similar to Xantrine doing similar things is amazing sort of opportunity there if you have the skill set to be able to chase after them. The great thing about it is it's relatively low cost. If it fails, it's not the end of the world, but it has the real potential of adding serious value to the company going forward.
Thanks, Daniel. We might stick with the same sort of vein for the moment. So how does today's announcement on multiple myeloma affect the funding needs for further trials?
Well, obviously, the first thing to do is animal work to prove up what's been seen in cells. And that's certainly a focus of the company, and that can be done relatively cheaply and quickly. But obviously, to take this forward, a partnership would be the obvious sort of opportunity to do. But of course, that depends on how we go and what happens over the coming months. But it certainly opens up a new opportunity, and for the shareholders, potentially a partnership may be ideal for this particular application. So it's certainly something we've seriously thought about, and you can imagine that we've had a lot of internal discussions about what to do, and we will update the market as soon as we can on what we're up to.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a lot of questions here about the SPP and interest in how it's going. And obviously just remind shareholders that we've got continuous disclosure obligations. But so Phil, I'll sort of wrap a few of these up into one. Hi, gents, can you please advise how much capital has been raised so far for SPP? And generally, how is it going?
I can remind you that we communicated an SPP plan that had 3 levels, 12, 20, and $29.7 million. I can tell you that we have that's open until the 17th. That's what we communicated. We haven't changed our position at this point in time. I'm not able to comment on progress at this point in time. But look forward to doing so after the 17th.
Thank you. And then a few follow-on questions, all fairly similar. If the SPP is not raised to the maximum amount, is there a plan to ask for institutional investor support?
Yeah, I'm probably not able to comment on that. That would be a matter for the board to discuss, debate, should that be the case. That's not our plan. We communicated our plan with the SPP, but we equally acknowledge that it has 3 points of outcome. We will deal with the outcome when it's known and advise shareholders as soon as the board's made a judgment.
Thanks, Phil. Just remind you all, if you've got a question, please drop it in using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We've got a lot here on the SPP. I think we've covered quite a few of those, so I'm going to dismiss the remaining ones. Questions on programs, etc., please whiz them through. So there's one here. Does RACE intend to become a going concern, given we are now looking for new molecules beyond Xantrine?
Maybe I'll take questions. Whoa, just a bit. Nice lightning there in the background. The answer to that question is it gives us opportunity. So if RACE was lucky enough to be able to sell Xantrine in total to one company, then we would have internally within that company, we would have the resources to be able to continue the company going forward. May not involve any of us, but it certainly means that it's not just one and done for the shareholders. It also opens up opportunities of partnering along the way. And certainly we've seen this with some of our competitors where they've partnered out some of their other development programs, where they've matched to large pharma, where it's matched their particular needs of large pharma. So the more opportunities you have for a partnership or a deal, the more likelihood that you're going to get there at the end. So ultimately, it doesn't matter how we actually achieve our aims, which is either a sale or a license and a return to shareholders. So we're really focused on making sure we get a good return to shareholders. As significant shareholders, we all want to see that. And I don't think anyone here wants to see another job for life. Phil's just retired from a long time at J&J. I was semi-retired before I joined RACE, and the last thing I need is another job. So, but I do want to see us succeed. I do want to see patients benefiting from Xantrine. It's a fantastic drug with an amazing opportunity, and it's our job to make sure we get it onto the market and get it to as many people as quickly as possible and get a return for our shareholders the best we can. So it's balancing all these things, but the more opportunities we've got, the more things we can do.
Thank you, Daniel. Okay, and so we do have a related question on partnering, and I don't know, Phil, maybe if you want to jump in. If RACE were to pursue a partnership, what are RACE's main objectives regarding the terms?
I probably won't answer talking about the terms, but I think the objective of a partnership would be to accelerate development, to accelerate the probability of generating a superior outcome. So if we can access capabilities, speed, market access, those would be, opportune decisions that we may wish to take, and ultimately value. I mean, we're responsible, as Daniel just said, to look at, well, how can we create maximum value for shareholders within the most appropriate time frame, and that has to guide our decisions going forward.
Thanks, Phil. While you're there, another related question on partnering. So given the changing opportunity mix and timeline, a partnership for a number of years seems more likely than a sale within the next year. Is that the case?
I think it's a possibility. Clearly, the additional cardioprotective insights change, if you like, the landscape of who we might talk to, how people may view us, and equally strategy around how we shape that. But right now, we're simply trying to accelerate our transition from our preclinical work into the clinic as quickly as we can. But it's appropriate and responsible on our side to make sure that we're thinking intelligently and carefully and on a considered basis about who, when, and how we might partner. So I'll give you that perspective.
Thank you. Okay, so again, similar vein, this is about comps. So are there comparative drugs to Xantrine that have been approved that we can draw a valuation from?
Maybe David should answer this one, but the simple answer is no. There has been no drug. We have the leading drug in the M6A space, the only drug in the clinic. All our competitors have preclinical drugs only in that space. We happen to have in the FTO particular space, a subset of that, we happen to have the best and the most clinically advanced. So we're first in class and best in class is the shorthand. The cardioprotection combined with better targeting synergy for cancer treatment, there is no other drug similar to that we know of. Of course, there could be one hidden away in some pharmaceutical company that hasn't seen the light of day, but there's nothing else out there known that can do both things at the same time. And that's a really special opportunity to have. So one of the difficulties with this whole space is oncologists are really focused on treating the cancer, and they're not so focused on worrying about the long-term consequences of treating that cancer. So the cardio damage that occurs from some of the drugs is something that's sort of tolerated and dealt with, treated as they're going along. And to have a drug that does both in one, so they're able to say we're targeting the cancer as best as we can, is pretty amazing. And at the same time, almost by accident, preventing the damage to the heart is something that's really appealing clinically and commercially, I think. David might want to add to that.
Yeah, I just might add some additional comments. For both the areas we're in, the FTO area and the cardioprotection, they're both new. The cardioprotection area is an emerging market, and in a way that's very appealing because there's less competition. But for both those markets, one of our jobs is to go away and define what the opportunity can be, and that's work in progress.
Thank you, David. Okay, now I just wanted to throw in a bit of a section break. There's a lovely comment here, which was not a question, but a comment to race management and IRD for clear and well-written communications and announcements. You guys rock. Thank you so much. Excellent. Okay, so let's move into what gave Race the idea of testing synergy with a protease inhibitor?
I'll answer that. It's fairly obvious to any drug in cancer. If you have two drugs that work in two different mechanisms of action, we don't know what the mechanism of action for Xantrine is. I guess we have FTO in cancer, but for the cardiac protection, we don't know at this stage what it is. But whenever you have two drugs that tackle the cancer in two different ways, it's always a good idea to check whether they actually show synergy together. If they're targeting the same pathway, then they're likely to be not likely to be to show that synergy. But if they're tackling complementary pathways, then you're often able to see this synergy. So, and so it's like fairly obvious. We've been doing this with all the cancer that we've been looking at. So melanoma, we've been doing this with clear cell renal cell carcinoma. We've been doing this with breast cancer. We did this as well. It's a fairly standard thing these days. All cancer treatments, combination treatment these days. You just want to find the ideal combinations. And we did that with AML. So the clinical trial that's currently running in Israel is a combination of 3 drugs that were checked in the clinic, preclinically in the lab, to identify which combination of existing drugs would work best with Zantran. And we're taking that into the clinic as a clinical trial and seeing how that performs. And the expectation is they'll perform better together than they will on their own. That's been the sort of the trend in oncology over the last, I guess, probably 30 years.
Thanks, Daniel. Okay, just a reminder to you folks sending your questions in to please pop them into the Q&A, not in the chat, so that I can keep an eye on the one stream. I'm simple. So here's another one. Were we approached to trial these drugs with Xantrine, or were they chosen by Race?
It needs to be a little bit more specific than... so certainly we went and had a look at carfilzomib, for example, and the anthracyclines, so we chose those. We chose those because they're known cardiotoxic drugs. So they're fairly obvious. You start. There's a whole bunch of other drugs that are cardiotoxic as well, which will be, the shareholders can expect that we will look at those as well. But that's announcements for the future. So we can't predict which ones will work or which ones won't. The only way you can really answer these questions is get into the lab, do some experiments, and the science will tell you the answer for it. So you shouldn't sit around and pontificate about whether something will work or won't work if you can answer it in the lab. And you should answer in the lab before you try and answer in the clinic.
Okay, very good. All right. So question here on the FTO program. So when will an update regarding Xantrine's clear cell renal cell carcinoma opportunity be released to the market, noting that the opportunity currently has 6 provisional patents?
Yeah. So we had previously announced that we'd have it this quarter. The program's going a little slower than we might like. In some ways, it's positive. You can look into that. But as soon as it's ready to be announced, we will make an announcement about that. So shareholders should expect an announcement shortly. I've been saying this. I don't like saying this, but unfortunately, you can't predict exactly when results will come in. Unfortunately, clear cell renal cell carcinoma is a slow-growing cancer. It's actually one of the reasons why such a dangerous cancer is it takes a long time to grow. And so the cells in culture grow slowly. And so doing experiments on them is slow. And you can't make cells grow faster just by yelling at them. They just don't. They grow as fast as they want to grow, and they do their own thing. And so until they grow up, you can't do anything about it. On top of it, they're not easy cells to grow in culture either. Some cells, probably the classic one is HeLa from Henrietta Lacks, to the cervical cancer cell line originally. That thing grows everywhere. It's like a weed. Anyone can grow it. But these cancer cells are difficult to grow, so difficult to study. It's probably one of the reasons why not much work is done on clear cell renal cell carcinoma compared to other cancers. It's harder to work on. So if you're a scientist, and you work on what's easy rather than what's difficult. So unfortunately for a patient, if you've got a difficult cancer, you want scientists to be working on the hard things. But it's progressing well, and we'll update the market as soon as we can.
Good work. Okay. This is a good question. Are you looking at different ways of introducing Xantrine into the body?
Yes. The answer to that is we have a whole program formulation. The SPP has set aside, I think, up to $3.8 million around this to both improve IV formulations that can be used peripherally and also an oral program. This program has been going for some time internally within RACE. So a lot of progress has been made. Shareholders should expect to hear updates about this, not in the long distant future. So, so it's an area that's been going, it's progressing well. We're very optimistic about how that's going. These are problems that they're just hard problems to solve. They're not impossible problems to solve.
I think, Jane, I'd also add to that question that we've also added capabilities. So Mike Kelso and recently Ben Buckley joining us, and the association with the University of Wollongong has given us, frankly, capability access. And we've got, means of moving these programs much faster than we could have before. So that's good news.
Great. Thanks, Phil. Okay, so question here on the solid tumour trial. Can you provide some more detail on the FTO solid tumour phase 1/2 trials? Is it Xantrine on its own or in combination? Will it cover melanoma and renal cancer?
That's a great question. The solid tumour trial in part is linked to the new formulation work. We're expecting to be in the clinic probably in the second half of next year. And we will have to, because Xantrine's background is in AML, but there is a history in solid tumours, we will initially have to do Xantrine monotherapy. But the proposal would be to quickly move that into the combination setting to take advantage of some synergy, for example, with checkpoint inhibitors. So there are some clever ways we can design the trial to bring in both melanoma and renal cell cancer in an all-comers design. And it will in part also depend on the animal data that Daniel's generating. So if, for example, renal cancer looks like it's much better than melanoma, maybe that becomes a priority. So we'll adapt our plans based on the data that comes through.
Thanks, David. Okay, great. Phil, maybe this one's for you. Is a dual listing in America a possibility in the near future?
Well, firstly, never say never. But I would say to you that if we were needing to access US capital, that would make sense. At this point, we do not have that need. And particularly if we wanted the visibility that would go with a US listing. And at this point, we're not seeking that visibility. So, never say never, but for the moment, that's not on our agenda.
Thanks, Phil. Okay, so good question here. Is Race exploring ways to exploit the tax relief for patents lodged in Australia?
I'm assuming that refers to the R&D tax rebate. We announced the receipt of that in the prior financial year in December. I'm just trying to think about dates, possibly this same week, 52 weeks ago. We are processing our claim, and we will advise the market as soon as we confirm the amount. That's imminent, I should say.
Yeah, I think that also might touch on the patent box proposal. I think it's coming from the government. That I think that's not been established fully about how that's going to work. So I don't know if there is. Of course, we'll take advantage of anything that's thrown our way. We'd be stupid not to. But at this stage, the R&D tax is really a huge advantage. We've designed a lot of our trials and our research to take place here in Australia to take advantage of that. So if we can run a preclinical program in Australia, we will. If we can run a clinical program here in Australia, we will. Not only does it benefit Australians, and we're an Australian company, which is exactly what we should be doing, we get that R&D tax benefit back. And that effectively doubles the amount of money we have towards the program. So, or we get it at half cost, if you want to look at it from that perspective. So not everything we can do here in Australia. There are some really specialised areas that you have to go offshore. An example of that is the Israeli trial, or the proposal to do the EMD trial in Europe. There's just not enough patients here in Australia that have EMD, AML to do a large trial. So all of these things, we basically, if we can do it here, we do.
Great, thank you. Okay, so yes, this is a long question, but you'll get away with it, Mason, because I know that you've been chipping away hard at doing your own research. So Daniel, because FTO is most likely the reason we are seeing improved anti-cancer efficacy, and there are many examples in the literature of FTO inhibition and knockdown models improving the efficacy of cardiotoxic drugs, can you please provide some additional information about the next cardiotoxic drug targets for this cardiac?
Okay, so the answer to the question is probably is the answer, although we don't know. It's quite possible that the mechanism of action that actually prevents the cardioprotection actually may be acting in cancer as well. Until we know what particular molecular mechanism we're targeting, we can't really necessarily say for sure what it is that it's working. And there's also at high levels, you get kind of a chemotherapeutic type effect. So my best guess is it to be multifactorial that contributes to the anti-cancer activity. But yeah, FTO is obviously the obvious one. It's very widely overexpressed across a wide range of different cancers. And so, yeah, that's to be expected. The rest of the questions, what was the rest of the question, I guess, Jane? It was a long question. Probably should have been split up into three.
It was, sorry, I have dismissed it. Let me just find it. The rest of the question. So, because FTO is most likely the reason we are seeing improved anti-cancer efficacy, there are many examples in the literature of FTO inhibition knockdown models improving the efficacy. Can you please provide some additional information about the next cardiotoxic drug targets for this cardiac safety program? Was the whole thing. Yeah.
We haven't yet announced what the other drugs will go after, but the obvious thing would be to look at all the cardiotoxic drugs, starting from most toxic to least toxic, and just work down through the list. These experiments can be done relatively simply in the lab, although I have to say growing cardiomyocytes in the lab is not easy. They're quite difficult to grow, but you just work through them and you find out which ones work, which ones don't. And we've seen this with other work we've done, where you'll see some combinations will give synergy and other combinations won't. We saw this with AML, for example. It's been published, so I can talk about it. Where some combinations showed synergy and other combinations didn't show synergy, and sometimes they actually interfered with the anti-cancer activity. So the only way to do is you do the experiments, run through, find out what works, what doesn't work, and then you take that through into an animal model, see if it works in an animal model, and then if that all pans out, you then take it off to the clinic and you do a clinical trial. I'm not going to say straightforward process, but it's a clear path about how these types of things progress through. The big advantage, of course, is we know so much about Xantrine from all the clinical trials we've done in the past. So that risk when you take a new drug into a patient for the first time is not something that we have to worry about. We know what the toxic doses are. We know what the doses are that we know how to dose and so forth. So there's a lot we know about the drug that really helps lower the risk of failure.
Thank you. Okay, I can see that we've got a really big thunderstorm outside. I can see that the Wi-Fi has been a bit patchy, so please just persevere with us. How will you balance EMD AML approval versus new potential on FTO and cardio protection when a quicker approval for EMD AML means the clock is ticking for patent availability? Does delaying EMD AML work in Race's favour from that perspective when you want to prove FTO and cardio protection?
I'll take this. I think it's in the shareholders' interest for us to accelerate all of the programs as quickly as we can. And we'll look to secure ways that we can distinguish Xantrine in the cardioprotective area from Xantrine used as a pure cancer chemotherapy, particularly in AML. There are ways we can do that in terms of formulation, different dosing strategies, that sort of thing, and that's part of the thinking that's going on at the moment.
Thanks, David. Okay, so what do you see as the biggest challenges in Xantrine's road to approval, given its history?
That's a very good question. In my experience, because older drugs do have a larger amount of data, that data obviously gets reviewed by the regulatory agencies. So in and of itself, that's a challenge. But we've spent a lot of time going through the historic data. And as we announced at the AGM, we are planning to file a new IND, and in probably the second half of next year. So the planning is well underway to be presenting all of the data, the old data and the new data, in the best possible way.
Thank you. Okay. So lots of additional questions here on Big Pharma and partnering. Phil, good to see you back there. So has Race commenced discussions with Big Pharma regarding a possible takeover or partnership? And if so, did Race initiate that?
The answer is no. However, I would say that at any time, and I know often people ask the question, are we leading? The approaches can come from the other side as well. So I would equally say that about pharma. Most farmers have, BD groups situated in Australia, in Asia, globally. So, potentially anyone could knock on our door at any time. But we've always said that we're in the business of generating quality data. The more data we have, the more clinical data we have, the greater our prospects for creating value and larger partnerships. So when we deem that's the appropriate time, we will reach out, and at that time we'd be more able to give you a view on how we're progressing.
Thanks, Phil. Okay. Given the recent breakthrough cardioprotective synergies with other drugs, will Race consider multiple licensing deals with individual drugs rather than a blanket deal?
Yeah, I think we could all answer that. I mean, the answer is yes, because if that creates more value, if it creates earlier partnership opportunities, and I think it would appear evident that could be the case, we certainly would be open to that. We've got nothing to say, though, in respect to progress. It's early days. We've just shared preclinical news. We've shared our ambitions about our clinical programs. When and if that changes outcomes, we'll let you know.
Given the amount of programs and new opportunities emerging and assuming the SPP is fully allocated, is there a need to expand the team?
Well, firstly, we've recently expanded the team quite significantly. So, of course, reminding you that David Fuller on my right, who you've met, David joined us, where are we now, 5 months back? And then Professor Michael Kelso, Dr. Ben Buckley. And we've also got a pharmacist on board. We probably haven't spoken about Michelle, but we've dramatically enhanced the team. But equally, I would highlight the expanded team, the partners that we work with internationally, the CA we work with to help administer programs. So we're doing so with intent. And I think if we need to expand, we will. I think at this point, we believe with the SPP target, if that's fulfilled, that we can go out and deliver the agenda that we shared recently with you all.
Thanks, Phil. Okay, is there any evidence that some chemo drugs may be toxic for general skeletal muscle? And is there any evidence that Xantrine may be protective against that muscular skeletal damage?
The short answer is probably the first part, yes. Some therapy drugs can be toxic to skeletal muscle. The answer is we don't know yet. And what I can say, though, is in the cancer setting, the cardiac muscle is the much greater toxicity. And so that's something we're very excited about. I joined the company I was excited about RACE before we had this cardioprotective data. Now we have the cardioprotective data. I'm much more excited and looking forward to exploiting that in the clinic. And I think what I can say is that the conversations we've had already with clinicians suggest there's a great deal of interest in this, and that's very encouraging for us as we make our clinical plans.
Thanks, David. Okay, so the recent investor presentation notes an IND submission for solid tumours. Which indications does this cover, and when can we expect lodging?
So the IND for solid tumours will probably be agnostic on the specific tumour types. There's a trend these days in oncology that you allow what's called an all-comers design, where patients can come in with multiple tumours, and that provides multiple flexibility. Obviously, we've declared that we're interested in melanoma and renal cell carcinoma. And at the moment, that's probably the best comment I can make. As I mentioned previously, the design of the clinical trial will very much depend on the results of the animal studies that are ongoing or shortly about to be started. So once we have that data, we'll be much better informed. That data will help us with our IND and help inform the discussions with the FDA. So that's our general thinking. Our plan, and maybe I'll go back to the question before about pharma partnering. The things that make RACE much more attractive to a pharma partner are, one, having an open IND. So that's going to increase our visibility. It's a stamp of validation for the company. Being in the clinic, we're already in the clinic for AML. Being in the clinic for solid tumours will be another stamp of validation. So my job is to make sure that whatever trial we do gets the best attention, not just from clinicians, but also from potential pharma partners. So I appreciate I'm being a little bit vague, but we have to be flexible to make sure we can achieve that as the data reads out. And we'll update the market as soon as we've made those decisions.
Thanks, David. Okay, so another trial-focused question. So you may need to whiz back in a second, but can you please comment on and discuss which ongoing or upcoming trial is most relevant to Xantrine FTO inhibition and the timelines expected for first results?
Yeah, so the solid tumour, the planned phase 1 solid tumour trial is that trial. So, and the stratum 2 of the ongoing AML EMD. And so, and as a reminder, the stratum 2 is low-dose Xantrine in combination with decitabine, and we're targeting patients who cannot tolerate the high-dose chemotherapy that's normally used in the AML and MDS setting. So they're the two that are the most relevant to the FTO. We've submitted to ethics in Australia, and we're hoping that we hear back from ethics before Christmas. So watch this space.
Okay, don't you go anywhere because I've got another question for you. So could management provide some additional information on the process of taking Xantrine from a central line IV formulation to a peripheral line formulation. Clearly, a peripheral formulation would be more advantageous to patients. So how advanced that program is in regards to the potential combination of carzilimib?
That's a good question. I might flick this one to Daniel because he's in charge of the formulation work.
We've been working on this for quite some time. Before David joined us, it's been a problem. It's been recognised for a long time that central line is not ideal for every cancer type. It's fine for leukemias, but for solid tumours, you really want to have a peripheral formulation, and ideally, you want to have an oral formulation if you can. And provides maximum flexibility to clinicians and patients, and maximises the probability that a clinician will choose your drug out of all the possible opportunities of drugs they might treat a patient with over all the others. So it's commercially very important. It also provides new IP, and that's one of the reasons why I can't talk much about it, is because it is until those patents are submitted, and they will be held to the last possible moment in order to maximise their life. I can't really talk about it. So yeah, it's like, I don't know, are we still on? We've lost Jane anyway. We're here, so at least the shareholders can hear us. Okay. So someone's popped up and said we're here, so we just lost Jane. Okay, that's okay. We can actually we'll look at the question and answers ourselves. Okay. Well, I guess we could answer this one. Would a future cap raise? Can't really talk about future cap raises. We have a policy of only raising what we need when we need, and raising the bare minimum we can to achieve the outcome we can. So that's all we can really do, I guess.
Thanks for stepping in there, Daniel. I think we've got a hair-raising time with our Wi-Fi this afternoon. Apologies, everyone. Okay, so question here on partnerships again, and Phil, perhaps we've knocked this off already, but is 2022 still the year in which Race will begin approaching Big Pharma for partnerships and buyouts, or has the cardioprotective discovery delayed this process in the interest of developing more data?
I'm probably not going to answer that definitively. I mean, we've got additional work to do and to report. We need to get into the clinic and get some initial results. So I'll probably pass, frankly, on. I don't want to make a commitment that may or may not be true. I'll answer later in 22 once we've got more data that justifies an appropriate response.
The answer is it's pointless approaching Big Pharma until you have the right data package. And otherwise others do go away and come back later. So when it's right, we will. We have John Cullity, our chairman, is very familiar with this process. He's been on the other side at Sanofi doing exactly this. He knows when we need to approach and what we need to approach, and we will be following his advice on this matter.
Okay, got it. Thank you. All right, so given the new emphasis on cardioprotective and FTO, what are your plans for either EMD, AML, 505(b) approval pathway?
Yeah. Hang on, Jane. We'll just move to David.
So yeah, the plans are very straightforward. We will be requesting a pre-IND meeting with the FDA, and at that point we'll be discussing the mechanism for approval. So that's another reason why filing the IND is very important. There are a lot of historic issues that we need to work through, and so I'd expect to be having that conversation with the FDA in the first half of next year.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. Okay, I'll just remind everyone, we had earmarked about 45 minutes for this session. We've got a couple of minutes left. So let's try to get through a couple more questions. Is there potential for a spin-off in pillars 1 or 2?
there's a potential for us to license partner, and with the additional formulations that we're bringing to bear, potentially it just opens up scope around the deals that could be done. So yeah, I'll pause on that.
Thank you. Okay. Question on today's announcement. So today's announcement shows that Xantrine protects human heart muscles from carfilzomib-induced cell death, a different drug class to the anthracyclines, while improving the carfilzomib-mediated killing of cancer cells. Was there a specific reason why carfilzomib was chosen, or was there a request from a pharmaceutical company to conduct this trial?
The carfilzomib is well known to be a very toxic cardio drug, so it's a major problem in the space. So, as I think we mentioned, that quite a large percentage of patients that are on carfilzomib end up with cardiac damage, or they have pre-existing cardiac disease that prevents them from being even given treatment at all. So it's fairly obvious that we would have a look at this. It just happens to be probably the second worst of all the drugs that are known. So you might think that the order in which they've been announced actually resembles the order in which they cause most damage to the heart.
Okay, thank you. Well, we are pretty close to time, so I would like to just make a community announcement, which is that reminder that the SPP wraps up next Friday, the 17th of December. So for anybody that wants to apply for new shares as part of that offer, please take note of your documentation and give us a shout if you can't track down your application form. With that, I might hand back to Phil and Daniel and David for any closing comments.
I'll simply add that today is about trying to be open and transparent to the degree possible. You know that we practice continuous disclosure. I think, and I appreciate the compliments that were given up front to Jane's team and our team about the depth and detail that we'll practice around sharing news and results as broadly and diligently as we can, and compliments to the team around me, Daniel, David, and others in the group who frankly spend quality time really ensuring that we hope deliver good communication for you all. That will continue. We'll continue to be transparent, and we, of course, will continue to progress our programs as best we can in our collective interests. So, anyone else? Daniel?
I'd just like to add, I know it's really frustrating for shareholders. They want to know answers to all these questions about our sort of future research and activities and all the rest of it. But some of these things we just can't share, because if we tell you, we basically destroy the patentability of those discoveries. And that doesn't help anyone, or maybe it helps some other company, but certainly doesn't help race shareholders. So I'd have to be able to sit there and tell you about all the fantastic things we're doing internally. The image I'd like to give you is an iceberg. There's a tiny part of the thing sticking up above, and that's what we've announced and what's visible. And there's this enormous work and activities going on below the surface. And so we will continue to have things expected to be announced in the future, and there'll be other things that will be unexpected, like today's announcement. So, but yeah, just look forward to, we'll continue to keep everyone as updated as possible, as quickly as we possibly can, but we're not going to put at risk the value of the company to let you guys know something. You'll just have to be patient. I know it's hard. Just imagine it's like Christmas, it's coming up.
I think back to you, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'll invite everybody to disconnect. Thanks again for all your time. We look forward to keeping you in touch.
Yeah,
good night.